Hey, it's Nathan. Before we start, I want you to try something. Run your tongue along your back teeth. Go ahead, I'll wait. That whole landscape in there, the ridges and the dips, you know it better than you know your own face. And you have never once looked at it. You navigate it in total darkness 1,000 times a day. Which means if something in there changed, you would know within a second, and you would have absolutely no way to prove it to anybody. That's the story today. A man goes in for a root canal. The sedation lets go about 10 minutes early, and because he keeps his eyes shut and his breathing slow, he gets to hear his dentist say some things that a patient is never supposed to hear. What I love about this one is the man at the center of it. He isn't a fighter, he's a listener by trade. A guy who gets paid to walk into a building and tell you exactly which wall is telling your secrets. And when he figures out what got put in his mouth, he doesn't take it out. He does something a lot colder than that. Stay with me on this one, because the way he turns a microphone around is the most patient piece of work I have covered on this channel. Let's get into it. Porter Linden had spent 19 years learning that buildings talk, and the whole trick of his profession was knowing that they never lie. He was 43, and he owned a business that most people could not describe even after he described it. The sign on the old Oddfellows Hall on Cardigan Street said Linden Acoustics in letters the width of a thumb, and underneath, in smaller type, sound, vibration, speech privacy. He measured rooms. That was the short version he gave at parties. If a school district built a new cafeteria and the noise in it made 11-year-olds cry, they called him. If a hospital's new wing hummed at a frequency that made surgeons irritable without knowing why, they called him. If a law firm wanted to certify that a conversation in the managing partner's office could not be understood by a paralegal standing at the copier 11 feet away, they called Porter, and he would arrive with a case of calibrated microphones and a loudspeaker shaped like a soccer ball, and he would leave 2 weeks later with a number. The number was the thing. Everyone else in the argument had opinions. Porter had a number. He had learned that from Sylvan Grebe, who was 81 now, and lived in a bungalow full of reel-to-reel machines out past the fairgrounds. Sylvan had hired him at 24, fired him at 25 for guessing, and rehired him at 26 when Porter came back with a notebook of measurements instead of an apology. The old man had a line he used like a hammer. "A room always answers," he'd say. "You just have to ask it in a language it can't lie in." Wendover, Ohio, was a county seat of about 31,000 people, and Porter had measured most of the buildings in it. The high school auditorium. The Presbyterian church, twice, because the congregation kept adding carpet and then wondering why the organ sounded like it was drowning. The old courthouse, and then, 14 months ago, the new annex attached to it. A glass and limestone box with a jury deliberation suite on the 3rd floor. He lived 9 blocks from the shop in a house with a bad porch and a good kitchen. His wife Josie was a freelance court reporter, the kind who could hold 4 voices in her head while her fingers did something that looked like typing and wasn't. 11 years of testimony in Ainsley County. They had met in a hallway outside courtroom 2, where he had been kneeling on the floor with a sound level meter, and she had stepped over him and said, without stopping, that if he wanted to know why nobody could hear anything in there, it was the return air grill above the witness box, and Porter had been in love before she reached the elevator. Their daughter Bess was 10, and she played the cello badly and constantly, and Porter had built her a practice corner in the basement with $200 of mineral wool and a moving blanket, and it was, he told people, the best acoustic work of his career. That was the shape of his life, the week his tooth started hurting. It began as nothing. A cold sensitivity on the lower right, 2nd molar, the kind of thing you notice while drinking water and forget by the time you set the glass down. It progressed the way those things do, politely at first. Then on a Tuesday in the last week of September it stopped being polite. He was on a ladder in the Wendover Public Library, taping a microphone to a ceiling grid, when the pain arrived like a thumb pressed into a bruise and stayed. Des Falconer, who was 34 and had worked for Porter for 6 years, and was the only person alive allowed to touch the calibration equipment, looked up from the laptop and said, "You've gone gray." "I've gone gray for a while," Porter said. "No," said Des. "Right now. Your face." Porter's dentist was a woman named Cho who had been cleaning his teeth since Bess was born, and when he called, The receptionist told him Dr. Cho was out for 2 weeks with a family matter, but that they had a specialist they referred to, an endodontist, and that he had a cancellation that very afternoon. That was the first thing. Porter noticed it and dismissed it, and 8 weeks later he would sit in his shop at 2 in the morning writing the sentence down on a legal pad, underlined twice. He had a cancellation that very afternoon. The endodontist was Dr. Perrin Slocum, and his office was on the second floor of a new medical building out by the bypass, and everything in it was the color of oatmeal. Slocum was in his 50s, tan in a way that October did not explain, with reading glasses pushed up into hair that was too dark at the roots. He had a handshake like a man closing a car door, and he called Porter by his first name within 90 seconds. "Molar's angry," Slocum said, holding the film up. "Nerves dying. We can do this the slow way over 3 visits, or we can do it Thursday and put a crown on it, and you can go back to your life." "Thursday," said Porter, because the pain had reached the stage where he would have agreed to almost anything. "You want gas?" Slocum said. "Some people white-knuckle it. I don't recommend it. You'll be here 2 hours." Porter said yes to the gas, and that decision would go on to end 4 careers and vacate 31 verdicts, and at the time it felt like nothing at all. Thursday came in cold and clear. Josie had a deposition in Findlay. Bess had orchestra. Porter drove himself out to the bypass at 7:40 in the morning, and the parking lot was almost empty, and he remembered thinking that it was strange for a practice that had seemed so busy on the phone. The assistant who took him back was young, 24 maybe, with her hair up in a claw clip and a name tag that said Brielle. She was kind in the automatic way of someone who is kind to everyone, and she asked him about his work while she draped the bib, and when he said he measured how sound moves through buildings, she laughed and said, "So you're the guy who knows if my landlord can hear me." "I'm the guy who can prove it," Porter said. She fitted the nasal hood over his nose and told him to breathe normally and count backward from 100 if he wanted, and Porter got to about 86 before the ceiling tiles turned into something soft. He was aware of the rubber dam going on. He was aware of Slocum's voice from a great and pleasant distance, and of a whine, and of the particular unmusical shriek of a file working in bone, and none of it belonged to him. Somewhere in the second hour, the pleasant distance began to close. It closed the way a fog lifts, in patches, so that for a while he had 1 foot in each place. He could feel his hands again. He could feel the corner of the dam clip pressing on his lip, and a cool wash of water pooling under his tongue, and the suction tube taking it away with a sound like a straw at the bottom of a cup. His jaw ached from being held open. He could hear the room properly, all of it, the compressor cycling in the wall, the hard ring of the tile floor, the fluorescent ballast at around 120 hertz that would have driven him crazy on any other day. He kept his eyes shut. He wasn't being clever. He was simply too heavy to open them, and by the time he wasn't, he had heard the first sentence, and after the first sentence he kept them shut on purpose. The first sentence was Slocum, and it was not directed at Porter, and it had that flat, private tone people use with an earpiece in. "Relax," Slocum said. "It's in." There was a pause the length of a breath. "He'll carry it everywhere, and never know," Slocum said. "That's the whole point of the location. It's not going anywhere. You can't take it out at night. You can't leave it in a coat." Porter, floating, thought about how strange it was to be able to hear a man's earpiece conversation and not the other half of it. Then he thought, distantly, about the phrase "everywhere" and "never know," and the fog thinned another inch. "I understand that," Slocum said. "I'm telling you the placement is good." The suction came out of Porter's mouth. Something touched the tooth, a firm click, a seating pressure that went up through his skull. And then Slocum laughed, a short, unpleasant bark of a laugh, and said the thing that Porter Linden would hear for the rest of his life at 3 in the morning. "And if it proves what she thinks," he said, "this man is done for. Absolutely done for. Your husband's a genius, Kat, I mean it. A genius." Porter did not move. It was the single most difficult act of physical discipline of his adult life, and he managed it because of something Sylvan Grebe had told him 20 years earlier in a boiler room, which was that the moment you react, you stop collecting. He lay there with his mouth propped open and his heart going like a bird in a box, and he collected. He collected the fact that Slocum had said cat, 1 syllable, a name or the front half of one. He collected the sound of the room, and without deciding to, he did what he always did, which was to build the space in his head. Hard floor, cabinets on the left, because the reflections came back tight from that side, the compressor in the wall behind his head, Slocum's voice when he turned toward the door, going slightly dead, meaning there was something absorptive out there, a person, or a coat rack, or an open doorway into a carpeted hall. He collected one more line, softer, half swallowed, as Slocum moved away from the chair. "No," Slocum said. "Nobody. She was out at 8, she'll be out till noon. Nobody sees the tray." Then a door, and water running, and Brielle's voice from somewhere saying his name in the too loud way people say things to patients who are coming up, and Porter let his eyes open, and let them be slow and stupid, and let his tongue be thick, and asked what time it was. He sat in the parking lot for 22 minutes before he could drive. He did not touch the tooth with his tongue for the first 10 of those minutes, because some animal part of him understood that as long as he didn't check, it could still be a dream cooked up by nitrous oxide and a bad night's sleep. Sedation makes people say they heard things. He had a colleague who came out of a colonoscopy, convinced the nurse had proposed marriage. At minute 11, he ran his tongue along the new crown. It was smooth. It was a good crown, honestly, well contoured, the margin tight against the gum, no ledge. He went over it once, twice, learning it, and on the third pass, on the tongue side, low, almost at the gum line where the porcelain met the tooth, he found a seam. It was maybe 2 millimeters long. It was not a margin. It was not a chip. It was a straight, deliberate line. And when he pressed the tip of his tongue against it, he could feel that one side stood a hair proud of the other, like a hatch that had been closed by a person and not by a machine. Porter sat in a cold car in a mostly empty parking lot, with his hands at 10 and 2, and his tongue against the seam, and he thought, with a clarity that surprised him, so that's what it is. It's a hatch. He drove home. He did not go inside. He went to the shop. The Odd Fellows Hall had been built in 1911 with 14-foot ceilings and a stage at one end, and Porter had spent 6 years turning it into the only room in Ainsley County where you could hear yourself think. The back third was a semi-anechoic space he had built himself out of studs and wedge foam, a room so quiet that first-time visitors got dizzy in it. Des called it the coffin. Bess called it the nothing room. Porter turned on the lights, locked the front door, and stood in the middle of his own quiet building with his heart still going. Then he got to work, because working was the only thing that had ever calmed him down. He set up a pair of measurement microphones on stands, 40 centimeters apart, and a third, a small omnidirectional capsule he normally used for balloon pop tests, on a boom. He sat in the middle of the nothing room, in the chair he used for listening tests, and he did something no dentist would ever think of. He recorded his own jaw. He tapped his teeth together, front, then left, then right. He hummed at 80 hertz and slid up to 400. He pressed a knuckle against his jaw hinge and dragged it. Every one of those things sends a signal through bone, and bone is a beautiful conductor, and Porter Linden had spent his career learning to read what a structure does when you excite it. He listened back at 3 in the afternoon with the lights off. The left side of his jaw and the right side of his jaw should have been near enough to identical. They were not. On the right, at every excitation, there was a small resonance sitting up at just under 9 kilohertz, narrow, high Q, the signature of something small and stiff and hollow. A cavity, not the cavity a dentist means. A void, with a rigid shell around it, mechanically coupled to his mandible. He ran it 4 more times to be sure he wasn't fooling himself. Then he sat with his hands flat on his knees in the dark. There was a chamber in his tooth. At 6 he did the second test, and the second test was the one that made him go outside and be sick in the alley behind the shop. He owned a spectrum analyzer and a set of near-field probes, because a fair share of his work involved chasing electrical noise that people mistook for acoustic noise. He set the probe up on a stand and put his face 6 inches from it and sat still, breathing, for 40 minutes, watching a waterfall display crawl down the screen. At the 11-minute mark, a spike. At the 51-second mark after that, another. They came every 40 seconds, plus or minus a hair. They were short, on the order of 30 milliseconds. They sat in a band around 2.4 gigahertz, which is to say, in the same neighborhood as every wireless thing in the modern world, which is exactly where you would put something if you wanted it to be invisible in a haystack. Porter moved his head 12 inches to the left. The spikes moved with him. He got up, walked out the back door into the alley, put a hand on the brick, and vomited onto the gravel. Then he wiped his mouth, came back inside, sat down, and started a new document, and at the top of it he typed the date, and under the date he typed one word: carrier. He went home at 8 and told his wife nothing, and that was the worst decision he made in the whole affair, and it very nearly cost him everything. He would explain it to himself later this way: the device transmitted. Therefore the device also listened. Therefore every room he stood in was a room they were in too. And the room his wife was in was the most dangerous room of all, because of that one line. If it proves what she thinks, she. There was a woman named Kat on the other end of Slocum's earpiece, and Slocum had called her husband a genius, which meant Kat was not she. She was somebody else. She was the client. She was the one who thought something. And Porter Linden, sitting at his own kitchen table on a Thursday night, watching his wife of 13 years scrape a casserole dish while their daughter murdered a box suite in the basement, could only think of one woman in the world who could hire a man to put a listening device in his mouth in order to find out if what she thought was true. Josie turned around with the dish towel over her shoulder and said, "How's the tooth?" "Fine," Porter said. "Numb." "You're quiet." "I'm always quiet," he said, and she laughed, and he looked at the woman he had loved since a hallway outside courtroom 2, and thought, with a nausea that had nothing to do with the nitrous, "Please don't let it be you." He did not sleep. At 2 in the morning he was down in the basement in Bess's practice corner, with a flashlight in his teeth and a legal pad on his knee, doing the only honest thing he knew how to do, which was to lay out what he actually had and refuse to color in the parts he didn't. Facts. There is a foreign body in tooth 31. It has an internal cavity. It emits a burst on a schedule. The crown has a seam, which means an access hatch, which means someone intends to open it again. Facts. Slocum knew. Slocum placed it. Slocum was on a call with a woman called Kat while he did it, and Kat's husband made it. Somebody wants to know something, and that somebody is a woman, and Slocum thinks that if the device proves what she thinks, I am, in his words, done for. Then he wrote the last line, and looked at it a long time. Not facts. That the woman is Josie. He sat in the dark in the little padded corner with his daughter's cello leaning in its stand like a sleeping animal, and he knew exactly what Sylvan Grebe would say, because the old man had been saying it for 20 years. Don't argue with a liar. Measure him. Porter Linden went upstairs at 4, showered, made coffee, and by 6 he had decided 3 things that would define the next 11 weeks of his life. The first was that he would not remove the device. A removed device is a dead device, and a dead device tells you nothing and warns them everything. The second was that from this moment on, he would speak out loud only what he wanted the listeners to hear, which meant learning, at 43, to be a different kind of man in every room he entered. And the third, the one that made his hands steady for the first time since the parking lot, was this. They had put a microphone in his head and pointed it at his life. Fine. A microphone does not care which way it faces. It goes where the head goes. So he would take his head places. The first rule he made for himself was that the shop was a stage and the nothing room was the wings. He tested it on the Monday. He walked into the front of the shop and said, out loud, to nobody, that he had a filling that felt high and he'd need to go back and get it adjusted. Then he went into the nothing room, shut the door, and watched the analyzer. The bursts did not change. Every 40 seconds, faithful as a metronome. That told him something important. The device was not smart. It was not deciding what was interesting. It was a dumb pipe, streaming or buffering on a fixed schedule to a relay that had to be nearby, and the relay was doing the thinking, which meant there was a second box somewhere in his life, something the size of a deck of cards, plugged in, patient, with a real antenna and a real connection to the world. He found it on the Wednesday, in his own truck, tucked up under the dash behind the fuse panel, spliced into a switch 12-volt line by somebody who had done a neat job of it. He did not remove it. He photographed it, noted the part numbers, and put the panel back. Then he sat in his truck in his own driveway and laughed, once, without any humor in it, because he had finally understood the elegance of the thing. They had not bugged his house. A house can be swept, and a house can be left. They had bugged the man, and then they had bugged the only place the man goes alone. He started on Slocum the following week, and he did it the way he would approach a building with a noise complaint, which is to say from the outside, slowly, gathering the boring facts first. Perrin Slocum, endodontist, practice out on the bypass, 4 operatories, opened 3 years ago. A house on Kettleman Ridge that Porter drove past twice and estimated at 4 times what an endodontist in a county of 31,000 people ought to be able to carry. A wife named Marlena who ran a boutique that opened on the days she felt like it. A boat. And a complaint, filed with the State Dental Board 26 months earlier, which Porter found in an afternoon because Ohio publishes these things, concerning the death of a 59-year-old man named Curtis Roby during a sedation appointment. Outcome: no action. Closed in under 5 months, which anyone who has ever waited on a state board will tell you is roughly the speed of light. Porter printed it in the nothing room, and while he did it, he said out loud, for the benefit of the tooth, that he was thinking about switching his homeowner's insurance. Brielle Ocampo took a lot longer, because Porter had decided early that he would not lie to her and he would not use her, and both of those decisions cost him 3 weeks. He went back for the bite adjustment because it would have been strange not to. He sat in the chair with cold hands and let Slocum put a hand in his mouth and say "buddy" twice, and he watched the man's face for anything at all, and there was nothing, because Slocum had done this before, and Slocum was not nervous. On the way out, he stopped at the desk where Brielle was fighting the printer, and he said, offhand, that if she ever wanted a summer job that involved crawling around in attics with a microphone, his shop paid better than a dental office. She said, everything pays better than a dental office. He gave her a card. That was all. 9 days later, she called him at 7 at night from a parking lot, and Porter, hearing the particular flatness in her voice, said hold on, and walked into the nothing room, and shut the door, and put his phone on a stand 4 feet away with the speaker off and an earpiece in the ear farthest from tooth 31, because he had learned by then exactly how much attenuation a closed hand and 18 inches of air would give him. Can I ask you something weird? She said. Yes, said Porter. There's a room, she said. It's the one at the end. We call it 3, and it's got a chair and it's got a cabinet and nothing else, and I'm not allowed to set it up. He sets it up. He books it himself, and he books it before 8 or after 6, and the schedule software shows those slots as blocked for equipment maintenance, and I've worked there 2 years, and nothing has ever been maintained. How many of those a month? Porter said. 2, she said, sometimes 3, and they're all the same insurance code, and they're all self-pay, and they all come out with a crown they didn't come in for. Porter looked at the wedge foam on the wall of his own quiet room and said, carefully, Brielle, I want you to write down every date you can remember, and every name you can remember, and then I want you to put that piece of paper somewhere that isn't your car and isn't your apartment. Why? She said. Because I was one of them, said Porter. The lab took him another 11 days, and the lab was where the whole thing cracked open. A crown is not made by a dentist. It is made by a ceramist, in a lab, from a scan or a model, and the lab is a small, strange world of people who are half artist and half machinist and entirely unimpressed by dentists. There were 2 labs in Ainsley County that did zirconia work. The first one, a bright place in a strip mall, had never heard of Slocum. The second was in the basement of a building on Renwick Street, and it was run by a man named Emil Kadar, who was 66 years old and Hungarian by way of Cleveland, and who had been shading porcelain since before Porter was born. Porter went in with a story about a research project, and Kadar listened to about 40 seconds of it and then took his glasses off and said, "You are the acoustics man, from the library." "I am," said Porter. "Then do not lie to me," Kadar said. "It is insulting, and my back hurts." So Porter stopped lying. He told him about the seam. He told him about the resonance at 9 kilohertz. He did not tell him about the transmitter, not yet. Kadar was quiet for a long moment. Then he got up, went to a gray steel cabinet at the back of the room, unlocked it with a key he kept on his belt, and took out a small cardboard box with a rubber band around it. Inside the box, in a little bed of tissue, were 3 crowns. He gives me the file, Kadar said. The design file, not a scan, a file, already designed, with a hollow. He tells me, mill it exactly. Do not question it. Do not deviate. He tells me it is for a bone-anchored hearing thing, a trial, a study. And I say to him, Doctor, I have made teeth for 41 years. This is not a hearing thing. And he says, Emile, mill the tooth. Why 3? Porter said. Because I mill 3 of everything, said Kadar. Always. 1 to fit, 1 for the fire, 1 for the drawer. 41 years, 1 for the drawer. And these ones I put in the cabinet, and I lock the cabinet, and I do not know why, and for 2 years I have not slept well. He held one up to the light. Under the lab lamp, the tongue-side wall of it showed a fine, perfectly straight line. An access hatch, said Porter. An access hatch, said Kadar, in a tooth. They sat with that. Then Kadar said, quietly, How many? 14, Porter said, later, when he had counted from Brielle's list and Kadar's job tickets and the appointment codes. 14 people were walking around Ainsley County with a hole in their head, and 13 of them did not know. He found Katrine Varick 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, and he found her because of a boat. Slocum's boat lived on a trailer at a storage yard on the north side of Lake Wyandotte, and Porter, who had a legitimate professional reason to own a very long lens, spent 4 cold evenings in a Toyota that was not his truck, learning a man's routine. On the 4th evening, Slocum did not go home. He drove out past the lake to the Sandhill Motor Lodge, 12 units in an L, the kind of place that had been failing gracefully since 1974, and he parked around the back, and 11 minutes later a silver hatchback pulled in, and a woman got out with her coat collar up. 40s. Dark hair, short. She moved fast, the way people move when they have decided not to be embarrassed about something. She went into Unit 6 and did not come out for 90 minutes. Porter did not run the plate because he had no lawful way to, and because he had already decided that the day he started breaking laws was the day he handed them the story they wanted. Instead, he waited for Thursday, because Porter had a theory about men like Slocum, which was that they were not romantics, they were creatures of scheduling. The next Thursday he was parked across the lot at 5:40 with the long lens, and he got her face. Then he did the boring thing, which is the thing that actually solves cases. He took the photograph home and spent 9 hours looking at the websites of every professional services firm within 60 miles. He found her on the 3rd page of a company called the Pallister Trial Group. Katrine Varick, Director of Field Operations. Above her on the page was a photograph of a woman of about 65, with silver hair cut in a hard line at the jaw, and the expression of someone being photographed against her wishes. Yardley Pallister, founder and principal. 31 years of helping trial teams understand how real people decide. And 2 rows below Katrine Varick, under the heading Technology, was a man with a soft face and rimless glasses, and a smile that looked genuinely pleased to be included. Crispin Varick, Director of Instrumentation. Porter sat back in his chair in the middle of the night and said, out loud, to a tooth, Well, that's interesting. I need to remember to call about the gutters. Then he went into the nothing room and stayed there for 2 hours, and when he came out, he understood at last why any of this had happened to him, and the understanding made him so angry that he had to go outside and walk 4 blocks in the cold before he trusted himself to drive. 14 months earlier, Ainsley County had opened its new Justice Annex, and 11 weeks after that, the county administrator had called Porter because the public defender's office was complaining that you could stand in the 3rd-floor stairwell and hear the jury. It was a real problem and a common one. The deliberation suite had been value engineered. Somebody had taken the acoustic ceiling out of the corridor to save $40,000, and the return air path above the wall did the rest. Sound does not go through walls nearly as often as people think. It goes around them, through the plenum, along the ductwork, under the door. Porter had done the job properly. 2 weeks, mid-October into November. He had run a loudspeaker in the deliberation room, playing calibrated noise, and put microphones in the corridor, the stairwell, and the mechanical chase, and he had measured the speech transmission index at the stairwell landing at 0.62, which is not a number, it is an accusation. 0.62 means a person of average hearing can understand roughly 2/3 of what is being said on the other side. He had written the report. The county had spent $91,000 fixing it. Everyone had shaken hands. And every one of his measurement sessions had also, incidentally, recorded whatever else happened to be making noise in that stairwell at the time, because that is what an omnidirectional microphone does. Porter had never listened to those files as audio. He had never once played them out loud. He had fed them into software that spat out a number, and he had archived the raw captures on a drive because he archived everything, because Sylvan Grebe had taught him that a measurement you throw away is a measurement you will need in court. The Ainsley County Court of Common Pleas had been in session during those 2 weeks. There had been a jury in that building. Porter went to the shop at 1 in the morning, put the drive in a machine that had never been connected to the internet, and started listening to 14 months of nothing. It took him 3 nights. Most of it was havoc and footsteps and a deputy talking to his wife about a transmission. On the 3rd night, at a timestamp in the 2nd week, in the mechanical chase where a microphone had been taped to a conduit for 11 hours, a man's voice said, quietly, close to the mic and unaware of it, "Nine's fine. Nine's paid. Nine's not the problem. The problem is the little one with the glasses. She's going to argue. So you tell him not to push. You tell him let her talk herself out." And then Nine folds his arms and says he's not comfortable. That's it. That's all he has to say. Then a pause. "I know what it costs," the voice said. "Tell him what it costs is a matter of public record either way, so he can pay it in money or he can pay it in Ohio knowing about the girl in Lima." Porter sat in a cold room and listened to it 11 times. He knew, in the way you know things when your whole spine is doing it for you, that he had never heard that voice before in his life, and he knew what he was holding. He was holding the reason. That was the first night he told his wife. He did not tell her at home. He drove them out to the reservoir on a Sunday and made her leave her phone in the car, and he walked her 300 yards along the dam, and then he stood downwind of her, at a distance that a man who makes his living on the inverse square law knows is enough, and he told her everything, with his hand half over his mouth, like a man with a cold sore, and Josie Linden listened without interrupting once, which was the most frightening thing about it. When he finished, she said, "You thought it was me." "For about 11 hours, said Porter, "and then I did the math on the dates, and the referral was arranged before you and I had any fight worth hiring a man for, and I have never been so glad to be wrong about anything." She looked out at the gray water for a while. Then she said, 31. "What?" said Porter. "That's how many hung juries I've taken down in Ainsley County in 11 years, she said. "Not mistrials, hung, 12-0, 11-1, 10-2, all of it. I know the number because Lorna in the clerk's office jokes about it. She calls it our hobby. And Porter, most counties this size run 3 or 4 in a decade." She turned around. "I have every one of them," she said. "Not the deliberations. Nobody has those. But I have the voir dire. Every single word of jury selection, going back 11 years, sitting on 2 drives in our basement, because I never throw anything away either." They stood on a dam in November and looked at each other. Then Josie said, "If you want to be very careful about this, we should probably stop standing this close together, because I've been talking for 4 minutes into your face." She was joking. Neither of them laughed. The pressure started 9 days later, and it started so gently that Porter almost missed it. First, there was a complaint to the state board that licenses acousticians, alleging that Linden Acoustics had performed testing at a school without a required certification. It was nonsense, and it evaporated in 2 weeks, but it cost him $400 and an afternoon, and it told him they were building a file. Then there was a break-in that was not a break-in. He came in on a Tuesday, and the alarm had not gone off, and nothing was missing, and it took him until Thursday to notice that the drive dock in the back room had been powered up when he had left it off, and that a folder on a machine had a modified date from Sunday at 11:40. They had copied everything. They had not taken anything, because taking things makes police reports. And then, third, And this was the one that made Porter Linden genuinely afraid. A woman started appearing. Her name, she said, was Danae. She turned up at the counter of the coffee place on Cardigan Street on a Monday and asked him, with a completely straight face, if he was the one who did the church, because she was on the committee at St. Bride's and the sound in there was killing them. She had a folder. She had actual questions. She was smart and funny, and she laughed at the exact moment a person laughs when they are trying very hard. She came back Wednesday. She came back Friday. On the second Friday, she put her hand flat on his forearm and left it there for one beat too long and said, "This is going to sound insane, but do you ever eat dinner?" Porter said, "I'm married." And she said, "I know," in a way that was meant to be an invitation, and he went back to the shop and sat down and put his head in his hands, and then he understood the whole business model. They had not put a device in his mouth in order to catch him doing something. They had put a device in his mouth in order to be present at the moment they made him do something. That was the product. That was what Yardley Pallister had built over 31 years. You do not find a juror's secret and hope it is big enough. You build the secret. You put a lonely man in front of a warm woman on 3 consecutive visits, and you record him at the exact instant he is weakest, and then you own him for the rest of his life for the price of a hotel room. Nines paid, the little one with the glasses, the girl in Lima. They had done it to a juror. They had done it to an expert witness before, and Porter found her the following week. A woman named Dr. Sabra Enright who had done accident reconstruction in 3 states until a stop for operating a vehicle while intoxicated, and a set of photographs that appeared in her department chair's inbox had removed her from the field in 9 weeks, and who now sold insurance in Fostoria, and who, when Porter finally got her on the phone, said, before he had finished his second sentence, in a voice like a door opening, and they were doing it to him, because in 5 weeks the state of Ohio would put Garner Hobart on trial for 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter in the deaths of Ori Hobbs, Dante Salcido, Susie Vachon, and Tegan Vollmer, 4 young people who had gone out on a rental deck at Sumac Landing on a June evening and gone down with it, because the ledger board had been fastened to the house with drywall screws, and because the Pallister trial group had a client who did not intend to lose. Porter Linden looked at the calendar on the wall of the Odd Fellows Hall. Then he took a marker and wrote, in the box for the 4th of December, in letters big enough to read from the door, "Call about the storage unit." And he said it out loud, twice, to a tooth. The storage unit was real. That was the whole art of it. A lie collapses the moment somebody kicks it. The only bait that survives contact is bait that is 90% true. So Porter rented a genuine 10 by 10 unit at a genuine facility on Route 30, in his own name, with his own card, and he filled it with genuine things. 2 road cases of old microphones, a rack of dead preamps, 4 boxes of paper reports going back to 2009, and 1 small fireproof safe with a drive in it. The drive was real too. 11 hours of a mechanical chase at the Ainsley County Justice Annex, recorded 14 months earlier, unedited. It was also, and this was the part that made Des Falconer laugh until he had to sit down, a perfect copy of the wrong 2 weeks. Porter archived by session, and the session on that drive was the 2nd week of the study, in which the microphone in the chase had recorded 11 hours of a compressor, a deputy's transmission problems, and absolutely nothing else. He talked about it for 9 days. Not obviously. He complained to Des on the phone about the price. He told Josie, in the kitchen, with his back to the room, that everything from the courthouse job was out on Route 30 now, and he'd sleep better. He said the word safe out loud maybe 6 times in a week. Then he mounted 2 cameras, one in the unit, in a road case with a hole drilled in the end of it, one outside, in a bird box on a light pole, aimed down the row. On the 6th of December at 9:40 at night, a silver hatchback came down the row and stopped, and a woman in a dark coat got out with a bag, and she cut the padlock with a battery grinder in about 11 seconds, and she went in. She was in there for 31 minutes. She photographed the reports. She copied the drive with a duplicator she had brought for the purpose, which told Porter that she had expected to find a drive, which told him they had been listening to every word he said and believed all of it. Then she put the safe back exactly where she had found it, put a new padlock on the door that looked like the old one, and drove away. Porter watched the footage the next morning with his coffee going cold in his hand, and there she was, lit up by her own headlamp, 41 years old, dark hair short, the director of field operations of the Pallister trial group, on video, in his storage unit, committing burglary in the 3rd degree. He said, out loud, to a tooth, that he thought the Bengals were going to disappoint him again. Then he went to see a judge. Bernice Talent had been on the Ainsley County bench for 19 years, and she was 70, and she had hired Porter Linden twice, once for the annex, and once, years before that, because she could not hear soft-spoken witnesses in her own courtroom, and refused to be a judge who said, "Pardon me." He did not call her. He wrote her a letter, on paper, in his own hand, and handed it to her bailiff in an envelope, because paper does not have a microphone in it. It said, in part, "Your Honor, I am not able to speak freely, including now. I am asking for 20 minutes in a room you choose, and I am asking that you not tell me where it is until I am standing in front of you. I understand exactly how this reads. I have measured your building. You know I do not exaggerate." 3 days later, a bailiff picked him up at the loading dock and drove him to a windowless conference room in the basement of the health department, where Judge Bernice Talent was sitting with a legal pad, and beside her, a man of about 50 in a gray suit who introduced himself as Lucien Vergara, Public Integrity Unit, Office of the Attorney General. Porter had brought nothing with him but his own head. He talked for 50 minutes. The resonance plot, the burst schedule, Emile Kadar and the 3 crowns in the drawer, Brielle Ocampo's list of 14 appointments in room 3, the Sandhill Motor Lodge photographs, Dr. Sabra Enright's phone number, and the recording from the mechanical chase, which Vergara made him play twice and then a 3rd time with his eyes closed. And the storage unit video, which was the moment the temperature in the room changed, because everything before it was a story, and that was a crime with a face on it. Vergara said, "Mr. Linden, do you understand what you are proposing? Say it out loud." "All right," said Porter. "There is a microphone in my jaw that I did not consent to. Ohio is a one-party consent state, and I am a party to every conversation I am in. Nobody needs a warrant for me to record my own conversations, or to keep a copy of what somebody else is stealing off my own body. So I am proposing that I stop trying to get away from it. I'm proposing I take it to work." Judge Talent put her pen down. "Mr. Linden," she said, "in 14 months, you never once told anyone you had recorded my courthouse." "I didn't know I had," Porter said. "Nobody listens to their own noise floor. That's the whole reason it works." Then she said, "The Hobart trial starts the 5th of January and I am the judge on it, so from this second forward, I intend to be so procedurally correct it will be boring. Mr. Vergara runs the investigation. I hear nothing that does not come to me on the record. And Mr. Linden, if a single thing you do in the next month is illegal, I will not be able to save any of it, including the part where you are the victim." "I don't need to break any laws," Porter said. "That's what nobody understands about my job. You don't have to sneak in anywhere. Buildings just tell you." Crispin Varick's instrumentation was beautiful, and that was the thing that finally undid him. Porter got into the guts of it with Dez over 4 nights in the nothing room, working from the relay under his dashboard, which he pulled at last, cloned, and put back. It was a well-made piece of hardware. It buffered. It burst on a schedule. It used a rolling identifier. And it was, Dez said with real respect, made by somebody who has never once been in trouble. Because it wasn't hardened. It had no anti-tamper, no authentication worth the name. It had been designed by a man who had never imagined that the thing on the other end might be looking back. They built a receiver. It sat in a Pelican case with a battery, and it did exactly one thing. It woke up on the same schedule and wrote down everything the tooth sent, at full quality, before the relay compressed it. Porter also built the honest version, a bone conduction pickup taped under his jaw and a body recorder in his shirt pocket, because Vergara said, twice, that he wanted a clean chain of custody on a device Porter controlled, and not just a copy of a stolen stream. Then Porter Linden put on a suit and went to work. The Pallister trial group occupied the top floor of the tallest building in Wendover, which was 6 stories, and Porter walked in on a Tuesday morning with a Brule and Care case in each hand and a smile. and told the woman at the desk that he was returning a call about their speech privacy. "I don't think we called," she said. "Somebody did," said Porter, and waited, because he knew exactly how a firm like that would react to the suggestion that their conference room might leak. Katrine Varick came out to the lobby 11 minutes later. Porter had wondered how he would feel, and the answer was that he felt calm and slightly cold, and the way he felt on a ladder. She shook his hand. She had a good handshake and warm eyes, and she said, "We're very careful about this room already." "Everyone says that," said Porter, "and it's true about 90% of the time, and the other 10% is the reason I have a house. Let me do the free version, 20 minutes. If it's tight, I'll tell you it's tight and leave." They let him in. Of course they let him in. He was the man from the county who had fixed the courthouse. He was in the annex report they had certainly read. He was a known, boring, local quantity, and the single most useful thing about being a man with a shotgun microphone and a soccer ball speaker is that everyone thinks they understand what you are doing. He set his loudspeaker on the conference table and ran a sweep, and he walked the corridor with a handheld and wrote numbers on a clipboard, and he did the job honestly, and their room was, in fact, mediocre. The door had no drop seal, and the return grill above it was a straight shot into the hallway ceiling. And the entire time, Tooth 31 sat in his jaw and did what it was built to do, which was to listen to everything within about 15 feet of Porter Linden's head and send it to a receiver in a Pelican case in the bed of a rented van in the parking garage 2 floors below. He came back Thursday to do the follow-up measurements, because you always come back. He was there for 4 hours. He was there when Yardley Pallister came down the hall and stood in the doorway with her arms folded and asked, without introducing herself, whether he had ever testified. "Twice," said Porter, "both times about ductwork." She smiled at that, a small, dry smile, and said, "We like ductwork witnesses. Nobody ever accuses a duct of an agenda." He was there, on his knees under the conference table with a microphone stand, when 2 people came in and did not see him and had a 90-second conversation about a panel and about a man named Prosser, and about how the little one with the glasses was, once again, going to be a problem. And he was there on the following Monday, invoice in hand, when Katrine Varick took a phone call 4 feet from his head and said, in a bored voice, that no, she had checked it herself. The second week was nothing but a compressor. The man had been telling the truth. He had nothing, and Yardley could stop asking. Porter Linden thanked her for her business, and carried his cases down to the garage, and sat in the van for a full minute with his hands on the wheel. Then he drove out to the reservoir and walked 300 yards along the dam and stood in the wind and said, quietly, to nobody, "Thank you, Sylvan." They gave Crispin Varick to Porter on the 16th of December, in a hotel breakfast room in Bowling Green, because Lucien Vergara had decided that the way to break this thing open was not with a subpoena, but with a marriage. Porter had argued about it. It felt too close to what they did. Vergara said, "The difference is, we're not manufacturing it, and we're not threatening him with it. We're telling a man the truth about his own life and letting him decide. That's not leverage. That's information. You of all people should know the difference." Crispin Varick was 46 and had a soft handshake and a laugh that arrived a half-second late, and he thought he was meeting a potential vendor. When Vergara showed his identification, Varick went very still and then said, with the weariness of a man who has been waiting a long time for something without knowing what, "All right." They did not start with the affair. They started with the tooth. They played him Slocum saying it's in, he'll carry it everywhere and never know. They showed him Emil Kadar's third crown in an evidence bag, and the resonance plot from the nothing room, and Crispin Varick, who was an engineer before he was anything else, leaned over it and said, almost to himself, "Oh, that's clever. You excited the mandible." Then he said, "They told me these were for a study. Bone-anchored transmission," he said. "Hearing research. 14 units. Consent forms I never saw, because I don't handle consent. I built them. I potted them. I wrote the firmware. I did the harvesting circuit because a battery would have been an ethics problem, and chewing gives you free energy, and I was proud of it, and I have never once been in a room with a single one of the subjects." "You are in one now," said Porter. Varick looked at him. "Which tooth?" he said. 31, said Porter. Crispin Varick put both hands flat on the table, and he sat like that for perhaps 15 seconds, and then he said, in a completely level voice, "My wife handles the field side." And that was when Vergara slid the second folder across the table, and it was not photographs, because Vergara had insisted on that, and it was not the motel. It was a transcript. It was Katrine Varick, on a Thursday in November, in a car, telling Perrin Slocum that she had told her husband she was at a deposition prep in Toledo, and that she would need him to keep the study cover intact for another quarter because Crispin got funny about the wording. Crispin Varick read it twice. Then he said the sentence that ended the Pallister trial group. "I have the build logs," he said, "serial numbers, firmware versions, and the commissioning records, which means I have the date and the patient identifier for all 14 units, because I insisted on that, because I thought it was a study." Perrin Slocum called Porter on the 22nd of December. He was chatty. He said the lab had flagged something on the batch, a shading issue, nothing serious, but he wanted Porter to come in so he could take a look and swap it if he needed to, no charge, and did the 29th work. Porter said the 29th was fine. He went in wearing a body recorder that Lucien Vergara had put on him personally in the parking lot and a second one in the truck, and he sat in that chair for the third time in 3 months and let Perrin Slocum put a hand in his mouth. Slocum had a mirror and an explorer, and he went straight to the tongue side, low, at the gum line, and Porter felt the tip of the explorer find the seam and stop. And Perrin Slocum, 48 years old, endodontist, father of 2, said out loud in a room with a recorder in it, hold on. Where is it?" Then, after a pause, in a voice that had gone up half an octave, "Where is the unit, Porter?" Porter took his time. He waited until Slocum's hand came out of his mouth. Then he sat up in the chair and worked his jaw and looked at the ceiling tiles he had memorized in October and said, "It's in a drawer at the Attorney General's office, with an evidence sticker on it, and the one in my mouth is a crown, a man named Emile Kadar, milled 41 years too well, and it's hollow, and there's nothing in it but air, and you have just been recorded asking me where your microphone went." Brielle Ocampo took her lunch at 11 that day and never came back, on Vergara's advice. The hearing was on the 9th of January, in Courtroom 1 of the Ainsley County Courthouse, which was the old room, the good one, with the pressed tin and the 22-foot ceiling, and the sound system Porter Linden had specified, commissioned, and tuned 4 years earlier. It was styled as a hearing on juror misconduct in State of Ohio versus Garner Hobart. The gallery was full. Ondine Vollmer, who was Tegan's mother and who had not missed a single day of anything since June, sat in the second row with her hands in her lap. Judge Bernice Talent said, "We are going to proceed in an orderly fashion," and then she nodded at Lucien Vergara, and Lucien Vergara said, "The state calls Porter Linden." Porter testified for 2 hours and 40 minutes and never once raised his voice, because he had learned from Sylvan Grebe that the man with the number does not have to. He explained a speech transmission index the way you explain it to a school board. He explained why a microphone taped to a conduit records everything, including what nobody intends. And when defense counsel suggested a man could imagine a seam in his own tooth, Porter said, "Yes, absolutely, which is why I didn't rely on my tongue, I relied on my jaw," and then he put the resonance plot up on the courtroom screens, and the room went quiet. Then, at 11:40 in the morning, over an objection that Judge Talent overruled in 9 words, they played the recordings. They played the mechanical chase, and a voice filled Courtroom 1, coming from 31 loudspeakers that Porter had aimed himself, and the voice said, "Nine's fine, nine's paid." And in the 4th row, a 58-year-old man named Neville Prosser put his face in his hands, which the bailiff saw, and which 2 reporters saw, and which Judge Talent saw. They played the conference room at the Pallister trial group, 4 hours of it, in excerpts. They played Katrine Varick saying the man had nothing, and they played Perrin Slocum saying, "Where is the unit?" Yardley Pallister sat perfectly still through all of it with her chin up, and she was still sitting like that when the deputies came down the aisle for her, because Judge Bernice Talent, having heard the whole thing on the record, in open court, in a room that had been built to be heard in, simply said, Mr. Vergara, I assume you have something to hand me. He had 11 somethings. Here is what the winter did to them. Perrin Slocum surrendered his license in March rather than face the board, which did not save him, because the Attorney General charged him with 14 counts of felonious assault for placing a foreign object in a human body without consent. And because the death of Curtis Roby during a sedation appointment 26 months earlier was reopened by a coroner who had not been consulted the first time, he pleaded in August. He is not a dentist anymore, and he will not be one again in this state or any other. Katrine Varick was convicted of burglary, tampering with evidence, and 11 counts related to what the indictment called a continuing course of criminal conduct, and she took the longest sentence of anyone because she was the one who touched all of it, and because she would not give up Yardley Pallister, right up until the day Yardley Pallister gave up her. Crispin Varick pleaded to a single count, cooperated for 9 months, testified for 3 days, lost his company, and kept his freedom, and Porter Linden shook his hand in a hallway afterward, which some people had opinions about, and Porter did not care, because the man had been lied to in his own house by the person who was supposed to be his witness in life, and had still walked into a hotel breakfast room and chosen the truth over his marriage. Yardley Pallister went to trial and lost, because 31 years of a business like that leaves 31 years of records, and because Crispin Varick's build logs married up to Emile Kadar's job tickets, which married up to Brielle Ocampo's list, which married up to Josie Linden's 11 years of voir dire transcripts, in which the same 9 names turned up as prospective jurors far, far more often than the mathematics of a county of 31,000 people permits. 31 verdicts were challenged. 19 were vacated. Some of those retrials went the same way the first time had, which is exactly how you know the system was working when it was allowed to. Garner Hobart was retried in the fall in front of a jury that nobody had touched, and it took them under 6 hours, and Ondine Vollmer was in the second row for that too. Dr. Sabra Enright's conviction was vacated in April. She testified at Pallister's trial in a blue suit and told 12 people exactly how it had been done to her, and she is back doing accident reconstruction, and she and Porter have lunch twice a year and never talk about any of it. 13 other people in Ainsley County got a letter, then a phone call, then a very strange appointment with an oral surgeon working beside an investigator with an evidence bag. 2 had been jurors, 4 had been witnesses. 1 was a county building inspector. 1 was a woman who had simply been married to a man the firm's client was suing. Emile Kadar closed his lab in the spring, at 67, and told Porter it was the back and not the business. Porter had tooth 31 restored in February by Dr. Cho, who cried a little and apologized for it twice. He asked Emile Kadar to mill the replacement solid, on the old machine, and Kadar did, and it is the best crown anybody in Ainsley County has ever had in their head, and there is nothing in it at all. On a Sunday in May, Porter Linden sat on the basement steps in a house 9 blocks from his shop and listened to his daughter play the first prelude, badly, in a corner he had built for her out of $200 of mineral wool and a moving blanket. Josie came down and sat on the step above him with a cup of coffee. They listened for a while. "Does it still bother you?" she said. "Not the tooth," said Porter. "What then?" He thought about it, the way he thought about everything, which was slowly and with the answer already in his hand. That it worked for 31 years, he said. That the only reason it stopped is that they put it in the mouth of a man who happens to measure rooms. If it had been anybody else, it would still be running. Josie put her hand on the back of his neck. "Then, it's a good thing," she said, "that they picked the one guy in Ohio who can't stop listening." Downstairs, in the quiet corner, Bess started the prelude again from the top, and got further this time. So that's the story, and what stays with me isn't the tooth. The tooth is the hook. It's the business model. They didn't go hunting for people's secrets, because that's slow and plenty of people genuinely don't have one. They manufactured secrets. They put a warm, funny stranger in front of a tired man 3 times in 10 days, and the moment he wobbled, they owned him for life. That's not blackmail the way we picture it. That's blackmail as a subscription service, and it ran for 3 decades on juries deciding whether 4 families ever got an answer about a deck that fell down in June. 2 things worth carrying out of this. First, Porter's rule. Don't argue with a liar. Measure him. He never tried to convince anybody of anything. He gathered numbers, kept his mouth shut in the most literal sense a man ever has, and let the record do the arguing. Anger would have gotten him removed in a week. Patience got him a courtroom. Second, and this is the one I'd want my own family to hear, the most dangerous stretch in the whole story wasn't the dental chair. It was the 11 hours Porter spent believing his wife had done it and not asking her. 11 hours is nothing, and he nearly spent it building a case against the one person who was going to save him. That gap is what the whole scheme was designed around. They don't need you to be guilty. They just need you alone with a suspicion. So ask, out loud, on a windy dam if you have to. Ask. If you got something out of this one, hit like and subscribe if you haven't, because next week's file is somehow stranger than this one. And tell me in the comments what you'd have done in that chair, honestly, because I don't think I'd have kept my eyes shut. I'll see you in the next one.